What happens when Hollywood's most beloved saint sits down with late-night television's most relentless inquisitor? The answer, as it turned out, was not a casual chat, not a clever exchange of anecdotes, but something far more dangerous. The night was destined to become a battlefield. The Late Show studio was alive with its usual midnight blue glow. The band had just finished its playful opening number, and the audience, buzzing with anticipation, roared as Stephen Colbert strutted confidently across the stage. There was electricity in the air, the kind that comes when people sense they are about to witness something special. Keanu Reeves was the guest. That fact alone was enough to guarantee headlines. Reeves was no ordinary celebrity. He was a cultural phenomenon. Fans loved him not just for the movies, but for the myth of the man himself, the subway rides, the quiet generosity, the countless stories of kindness whispered through Hollywood like urban legends. He was the good guy of an industry notorious for arrogance and excess. And yet, that very image, the saint-like aura, was also the perfect target for someone like Colbert. The late-night host had built his career on dismantling facades, on skewering hypocrisy with razor-sharp wit. Tonight, he wasn't sitting across from just any movie star. He was staring at a living symbol, a myth made flesh. And myths, Colbert believed, were meant to be punctured. The cameras rolled. The applause swelled. Keanu Reeves walked on stage in his understated black suit, long hair falling over his shoulders, and bowed slightly before taking his seat. He smiled shyly, almost bashfully, as the audience showered him with adoration. His posture was humble, his demeanor gentle. To the casual eye, it was just another Hollywood star making a promotional appearance. But underneath the surface, there was tension. Stephen Colbert leaned back in his chair, shuffling his note cards with the casual confidence of a man holding a loaded weapon. He smiled warmly, too warmly. His eyes, however, carried a different message. Tonight, you're not here to be celebrated. You're here to be tested. Keanu, Colbert began, his voice smooth, almost playful. Thank you so much for being here tonight. You've been in some of the most iconic movies ever made. The Matrix, John Wick, Speed. You've got range, right? The audience laughed. It was classic Colbert, a compliment disguised as a jab. The kind of question that wasn't really a question at all, but an opening move in a game of intellectual chess. Keanu smiled politely, his voice soft and measured. I just try to bring honesty to the roles, Stephen. That's what matters to me. It was the perfect Keanu answer. Humble, simple, direct. The audience applauded warmly. To them, it sounded exactly like the man they adored. But Colbert wasn't satisfied. His head tilted slightly, his smile tightened, and the sparkle in his eyes shifted from welcoming to predatory. Honesty, he repeated, as though savoring the word. Sure. But let's talk about range. Some critics say you don't really have any. That you've been playing the same character, stoic, quiet, brooding for 30 years. What do you say to that? The room fell silent. The laughter died in people's throats. The mood shifted from lighthearted banter to uneasy tension in a matter of seconds. This was not a joke. This was an accusation. Keanu's smile faltered. It was still there, faintly, like the ghost of an expression, but it no longer reached his eyes. He shifted in his chair, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but enough for the audience to sense the discomfort. He paused. The silence stretched. You could feel the air thickening, the weight of expectation pressing down. Finally, he spoke. I think, he said slowly, carefully, that every role has its own truth. Maybe I don't shout a lot on screen, but silence can speak too. The audience erupted in applause, a protective wave of support. They were signaling to Colbert, don't push him too hard. He's our guy. But Colbert wasn't listening to the audience. He was listening to the weakness in the answer. And like a shark smelling blood, he went in for the bite. That's beautiful, Colbert said with a mock earnest grin. A truly zen approach to the craft. But come on, Keanu. Don't you ever wonder why people joke that you've got just one expression? That your emotional range goes from blank stare To blank stare with a gun? Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. The joke was cruel precisely because it echoed a popular meme, a stereotype that had dogged Reeves for years. Colbert wasn't just teasing, he was weaponizing the internet's collective criticism, placing it in front of Keanu like damning evidence. The big screen behind them flickered on. A triptych of stills appeared. Keanu in Point Break, Keanu in The Matrix, Keanu in John Wick. In each, his face bore the same stoic, reserved expression. Exhibit A, B, and C, Colbert declared triumphantly, gesturing toward the screen. The evidence is compelling. The audience gasped, then laughed again, but uneasily this time. Some clapped out of habit, others sat stiffly, their discomfort visible. Keanu exhaled slowly, his face tightening. His smile had disappeared entirely. His voice, when it came, was calm but edged with steel. "Well, Stephen," he said evenly, "I don't take roles to prove something to critics. I take them because they mean something to me, because I find a connection to the character's journey." The audience cheered loudly, erupting into whistles and applause. It was a rallying cry, a line in the sand. But Colbert only leaned closer, his smirk deepening. "Right," he said smoothly. "But doesn't that sound a little convenient? John Wick is basically Neo with a dog and a better tailor, and Neo was basically Jack from Speed in a leather trench coat. The argument isn't that they're not great movies, Keanu. The argument is that they all star the same character, you. Are you really acting, or are you just being yourself, over and over again?" The gasp this time was audible, sharp, like a collective intake of breath. The gloves were off. The question wasn't just pointed, it was devastating. The myth of Keanu Reeves, the humble saint, was being dismantled in real time, and it was only the beginning. The air in the studio thickened. What had begun as harmless banter had sharpened into a duel, and the audience could feel it. Keanu Reeves sat back slightly, his posture tense but still controlled. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked onto Colbert's with a new intensity. The warmth that had defined his public persona seemed to drain away, replaced by a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. "I think," Keanu said, his voice low, deliberate, "being yourself isn't a crime, and if people see me in those roles, maybe it's because I bring something real to them. Something they can connect with. Maybe that honesty is more important than a fake accent or a prosthetic nose." The audience burst into cheers, many standing to applaud. They wanted their hero to fight back, and he had. For the first time, Keanu had raised his voice not in volume, but in conviction. But Colbert wasn't done. If anything, the applause only fueled him. He leaned forward across his desk, the predator closing in on its prey. "Or maybe," Colbert said smoothly, "they just like watching you shoot people in slow motion." The laughter that followed was thinner this time, scattered, uneasy. It was clear the audience didn't want to laugh at Keanu, they wanted to protect him. But Colbert had struck again, reducing 3 decades of work into a shallow spectacle of violence and slow-motion gunplay. Keanu's face hardened. His hands, usually relaxed in his lap, now gripped the arms of his chair. "You're mocking my work, Stephen," he said firmly. His voice was calm, but beneath it was a simmering fury. "You invited me here to talk about a film, but all you're doing is belittling what I've dedicated my life to for 30 years. The audience erupted in loud applause and whistles. A few even booed Colbert. The room was now divided, energy splintered between loyalty to Reeves and fascination with the host's audacity. Colbert tilted his head, pretending to shrug it off, but his eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "I'm just asking what everyone else is thinking," he said, feigning innocence. Then, with a sharp smile, "Don't you think it's fair to ask if the so-called nicest guy in Hollywood is actually the most overrated actor in Hollywood?" The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped audibly, a ripple of shock coursing through the studio. Some booed loudly now, their loyalty to Reeves overwhelming their deference to Colbert. Others sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. His calm exterior cracked just enough for viewers to see the anger beneath. "You sit here every night," he said, his voice sharp, "in your expensive suit, behind your polished desk, and you tear people down for laughs. I spend my life trying to build something, to create stories that people care about. Maybe I don't owe you or anyone a performance that fits your narrow checklist of emotions." The crowd exploded into cheers. People stood, clapping wildly. The atmosphere shifted again, the pendulum swinging firmly in Keanu's favor. But Colbert, ever the tactician, didn't retreat. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, as though the confrontation was all part of the show. "Touchy," he said lightly, his voice mocking, dismissive. "So, no regrets then? No desire to prove the critics wrong? Just another blank stare in another billion-dollar movie?" It was the final twist of the knife, a casual dismissal of Reeves's entire career as repetitive, hollow, unearned. Keanu exhaled sharply, his composure straining. He could feel the trap closing around him, the baited hook digging deeper. Colbert wasn't asking questions, he was performing an autopsy on live television, slicing open a man's career and displaying the organs to an audience that didn't want to see. The screen behind them flickered again. Clips played in quick succession. Jack Traven in Speed, Neo in The Matrix, John Wick in his blood-soaked suit. Each clip showed Keanu in near-identical moments, focused, stoic, calm under chaos. "See?" Colbert said, gesturing theatrically. "Different names, same man. Speed, The Matrix. John Wick, a trilogy of blank stares. You could swap out the dialogue and no one would notice." The audience groaned, some booing openly now. The tension in the room was nearly unbearable. Keanu's voice, when it came, was sharper than ever before. "You think this is funny? You think people come to see my movies because I can juggle accents or cry on command? They come because they see something real. They see grief. They see loyalty. They see love. That's not blank. That's human." The audience roared in approval. Some even chanted his name. The energy surged back to Keanu, the crowd lifting him up against Colbert's relentless barbs. But Colbert pressed on, unwilling to yield. "Grief, loyalty, love, sure. But you don't exactly stretch, do you?" Daniel Day-Lewis disappears into his characters. Meryl Streep transforms. "You? You just show up as Keanu. You're not acting, you're brand management." The insult cut deep. Reeves's lips pressed tightly together, his jaw clenched. For a man celebrated for his zen-like calm, this was uncharted territory. "I don't need to disappear to be real," he said, his voice shaking slightly, not with fear, but with fury. "If my truth isn't good enough for you, fine. But don't sit there and tell me I'm nothing but a brand. I give everything I have to every role. Everything." The audience thundered with applause, the walls of the studio vibrating with the sound. But the damage was done. Colbert had forced Keanu into defending not just a role, not just a movie, but his entire existence as an artist. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest blow of all. What unfolded in the studio that night was more than a failed interview. It was a clash of ideologies, a war between two entirely different visions of what acting truly means. Stephen Colbert, the satirical host with the sharpest of tongues, embodied what could be called the school of transformation. To him and to the critics who shaped his worldview, great acting was about disappearance. It was about vanishing into a role so completely that the actor was no longer visible. Daniel Day-Lewis disappearing into Abraham Lincoln. Meryl Streep conjuring accent after accent, persona after persona, each indistinguishable from her own self. These were the gods in Colbert's pantheon. In that tradition, to be a great actor was to erase yourself entirely, to become a chameleon, a blank canvas onto which new characters could be painted. For Colbert, Keanu Reeves was the antithesis of this vision. He was not a chameleon. He was not a shapeshifter. He was always Keanu, long hair or short, gun or no gun, but still Keanu. To Colbert, this was not craft, it was laziness dressed up as sincerity. His jokes about the blank stare and his accusations of brand management were not random barbs. They were the logical extension of his philosophy. If acting is about transformation, then Keanu was guilty of malpractice. Keanu Reeves, however, carried within him a different philosophy entirely, the school of being. For him, acting was not about vanishing, but about revealing. It was about peeling away artifice until only the core truth remained. He did not want to disappear behind masks. He wanted to uncover the fragments of his own humanity that connected to the story. John Wick was not just choreography and vengeance, it was grief, distilled through Keanu's own experience of loss. Neo was not just a leather-clad messiah. It was the search for purpose that Keanu himself had wrestled with in his private life. When Keanu said, "I just try to bring honesty to the roles," it was not deflection. It was a declaration. It was a statement of artistic creed. To him, honesty was more valuable than transformation. Silence was not absence, it was presence. Stillness was not emptiness, it was density. But Colbert could not or would not accept that. His line of questioning revealed not curiosity, but denial. To him, Keanu's stillness was not intentional. It was a deficiency. His silence was not profound. It was void. His calm was not craft. It was inertia. That was why the confrontation felt so brutal. Colbert was not simply criticizing Reeves's roles. He was denying the validity of his very method. The two men were not arguing over performances. They were arguing over reality itself. The audience could feel it. They were no longer just viewers of a late-night comedy show. They were witnesses to a philosophical battle. On one side, the intellectual host, armed with irony, statistics, and tradition. On the other, the quiet actor, armed with sincerity, humility, and the weight of lived truth. Every exchange was a proxy war. When Colbert sneered, "Are you really acting, or are you just being yourself over and over again?" He wasn't only mocking Reeves. He was asking the question that haunted all of Hollywood. Is authenticity enough? When Reeves fired back, "Being yourself isn't a crime," he wasn't only defending his own choices. He was defending an entire tradition of minimalist acting, a belief that the greatest art sometimes comes not from masks, but from vulnerability. The tension rose because neither man could concede. For Colbert to admit Reeves had validity would be to betray his critical philosophy. For Reeves to admit Colbert had a point would be to betray his very identity as an artist. The clash deepened when Colbert raised the pantheon. "Look at Daniel Day-Lewis," Colbert pressed, his voice sharp with triumph. "The man disappears into everything. You don't see him, you see the character. That's acting. That's transformation. That's art. Compared to that, your stillness looks like stagnation." The audience shifted, restless. Some murmured in agreement Day-Lewis was indeed the gold standard. Others bristled, feeling their hero insulted once again. Keanu's reply came low, but it carried weight. Day-Lewis is brilliant. Streep is brilliant, but their way isn't the only way. Acting isn't just imitation, it's transmission. It's taking something inside you and offering it, unguarded, to the world. I don't hide behind masks. I let the audience see me. The audience erupted in applause. For them, it was not an abstract argument. It was why they loved Keanu Reeves. They didn't go to see him disappear. They went to see him be. To see the sincerity that slipped through every performance. Colbert smirked, but his eyes narrowed. The debate was no longer just playful sparring. It was turning into a duel of worldviews, fought not with fists, but with words sharpened like blades. And for the first time in his long career, Keanu Reeves was no longer the Zen monk of Hollywood. He was a man defending his very soul. The moment Keanu Reeves disappeared backstage, the studio transformed into something it had never been before, a battlefield without its central combatant. His empty chair glared back at Stephen Colbert like an accusation. The silence in the room was thick, oppressive, and uncharacteristic of the Late Show's usual rhythm of applause and laughter. At first, no one moved. The audience, trained by countless nights of late-night comedy to expect a joke, a wink, A cut to commercial simply froze. They were waiting for the punchline that never came. But there was no laughter, no levity, only the sharp echo of the chair scraping against the floor still ringing in their ears. Stephen Colbert, for once, looked unsettled. He adjusted his cuffs, glanced at his cue cards, and forced a smile that seemed brittle under the weight of what had just happened. He leaned into the mic and said with a nervous chuckle, "Well, I guess that's the most emotion we've ever seen from him." The line, which might have landed with light-hearted humor in another context, fell like a stone into a well. Instead of laughter, the crowd gave a low murmur of disapproval. A woman in the front row, her arms crossed tightly, shook her head in disgust. Somewhere in the back, a man shouted, "Not cool, Stephen!" It was rare, almost unheard of, for Colbert to lose his audience. But tonight, his wit had curdled into cruelty, and everyone knew it. The band, sensing the awkwardness, tried to fill the void with a jazzy riff, but it only deepened the discomfort. The director's voice crackled in Colbert's earpiece. Cut to commercial, now. The screen faded to black. By the time commercials ended, the real show had already shifted to another stage entirely. Social media. Within minutes, clips of Keanu standing up, removing his microphone, and walking off circulated across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Hashtags exploded. Team Keanu, Colbert crossed the line, and blank stare but legend. One viral tweet read, "Keanu Reeves didn't walk out because he was weak. He walked out because he was strong enough to know his worth. Respect." It was retweeted hundreds of thousands of times within the hour. Fans began sharing their personal encounters with Keanu, stories of him buying meals for strangers, signing autographs with humility, or quietly donating to hospitals without ever seeking publicity. Each anecdote was offered as proof that the man who walked off stage was not an arrogant celebrity, but a human being finally refusing to be diminished. Memes flourished too. One showed Colbert with the caption, "When you try to roast a saint and end up roasting yourself." Another contrasted two chairs, one labeled Colbert's stage, and the other, empty but glowing, labeled the chair of truth. By morning, the narrative had solidified. Keanu Reeves had been wronged. The entertainment industry was quick to take sides. Directors, actors, and even critics weighed in. Guillermo del Toro tweeted, "Art is not measured only by transformation. It is also measured by sincerity." Keanu embodies that. Silence can be louder than words. Charlize Theron posted a picture of her and Keanu on the set of Sweet November, captioned, "One of the most genuine people I've ever worked with. We don't deserve him." Even actors known for their range came to his defense. Viola Davis wrote, "Every actor brings themselves into a role. That's not a weakness. That's courage." The rare voices that tried to defend Colbert, arguing that he was just doing his job or asking tough questions, were drowned out by the tidal wave of Keanu's defenders. The consensus was clear. Colbert had gone too far. Behind the scenes, the Late Show team was in crisis mode. Overnight ratings showed a spike in viewership due to the walkout, but audience surveys revealed unprecedented disapproval. The incident wasn't playing as edgy television, it was cruel. In editorial meetings the next morning, producers debated damage control. Should Colbert apologize? Should they invite Keanu back for reconciliation? Or should they double down, framing it as bold, no-holds-barred journalism? Colbert himself reportedly resisted apologizing. According to leaks from the staff, he argued, "If we can't question the myth of Keanu Reeves, then what's the point of the show?" But even he seemed shaken by the backlash. The man who built his career on dissecting power was now accused of abusing it. Keanu Reeves, true to form, did not rush to the cameras. He issued no statement that night, nor the following day. His silence spoke louder than any press release could. For fans, his refusal to engage became part of the myth. He didn't need to defend himself. He didn't need to clap back. His silence was interpreted as grace, dignity, even quiet defiance. When he finally broke it 3 days later, in a brief comment to a paparazzo who asked about the incident, his words were simple. I just didn't feel respected. That's all. The clip, only 9 seconds long, went viral instantly. To millions, it crystallized the entire controversy. Colbert had sought to portray Keanu as emotionally vacant. Instead, he had exposed him as a man with limits, a man who valued respect over spectacle. But the debate did not end there. Beyond the memes and the outrage, the confrontation sparked a deeper conversation across film circles, classrooms, and opinion columns. What is acting? Critics lined up on both sides. Some echoed Colbert's view, arguing that the greatest actors vanish completely. They pointed to Gary Oldman, Cate Blanchett, Daniel Day-Lewis actors who seemed to liquefy into their roles. By that standard, Keanu's career was indeed repetitive. But others championed Reeves's philosophy of authenticity. They argued that his restraint was not emptiness but presence. They pointed out that minimalism had always existed in cinema, from Clint Eastwood's taciturn gunslingers to Toshiro Mifune's stoic samurai. In this tradition, the stillness was not lack of craft but a mastery of understatement. One critic wrote, "Keanu doesn't disappear into roles, he invites the roles into him. He becomes the vessel through which audiences feel universal grief, resilience, or wonder. That is no less valid than mimicry." The most enduring image of that night was not Colbert's smirk or Keanu's anger. It was the empty chair. Screenshots of it circulated endlessly online. To some, it represented defiance, a man refusing to play by a cruel host's rules. To others, it was a monument to respect denied, a visual metaphor for what happens when humanity walks out on cynicism. Professors used it in lectures about performance studies. Think pieces likened it to political walkouts, moments when silence and absence spoke louder than any speech. The chair, once an ordinary piece of studio furniture, had become a symbol, a meme, a rallying cry. In the months that followed, the fallout continued to ripple. For Keanu Reeves, the incident only amplified his already saint-like reputation. His next film release shattered box office expectations, fueled in part by the public's protective instinct. Fans bought tickets not only for the movie but as a statement of loyalty. For Stephen Colbert, however, the incident became a scar. While he remained a fixture of late-night television, the episode lingered like a shadow. Jokes about him being the man who made Keanu walk out followed him everywhere. In interviews, he was forced to defend himself repeatedly. And though he eventually offered a carefully worded apology, "I respect Keanu Reeves deeply, and I regret if my questions came off as harsh," it was seen as too little, too late. Even years later, retrospectives on his career would list the moment as a turning point, a cautionary tale of when satire becomes cruelty. What, then, was the true legacy of that night? For Keanu, it was a reaffirmation. He didn't need transformation. He didn't need accents or prosthetics to prove his worth. He only needed honesty. And when honesty was disrespected, he chose to walk away. For Colbert, it was a reminder of the fragility of the host's power. A host without a guest is just a man behind a desk. A smirk cannot fill an empty chair. For the audience, it was a revelation. They witnessed not just entertainment but rupture, a moment when a talk show peeled away its mask and revealed raw conflict. And for the culture at large, it became a parable about art, criticism, and respect. It forced people to reckon with the fact that there are many ways to create truth on screen and many ways to destroy it on stage. The night Keanu Reeves walked off, The Late Show will be remembered not as a failure, but as a fault line. A rupture where two philosophies collided, where satire met sincerity, and where a single empty chair came to symbolize the enduring dignity of walking away.